Friedlieben und aber auch tapfer ist. Und ihr müsst friedfertig sein.
Adolf Hitler plunged the world into the most catastrophic war in human history. His rise to power was marked by the influence of a ruthless inner circle. The key figures who brought the Nazi vision to life, from Heinrich Himmler, the architect of the Holocaust, to Joseph Goebbels, the voice of Nazi propaganda, these leaders were the enforcers of Hitler's brutal regime. Together, his men shaped one of the darkest chapters in human history.
Als ich an die Spitze des preußischen Innenministeriums berufen wurde, wusste ich, dass ich das schwerste Amt übernehmen musste, denn hier liegt der Schlüssel zur gesamten Machtposition. Ich werde mit eisernem Besen auskehren.
Born on January 12, 1893, Hermann Wilhelm Goring entered a world teetering on the edge of destruction, soon to be ravaged by 2 world wars. His early years were molded by the iron grip of military discipline, a prelude to the monstrous role he would play as one of Hitler's most powerful and sinister lieutenants. From commanding the feared Luftwaffe to orchestrating the terror of the Gestapo, Goering's path was one of ambition, brutality, and infamy, cementing his place as one of the most notorious architects of the Nazi regime.
Goring was quite an interesting character because he had several different roles in the Third Reich, and even before then, if we think about his First World War record as this sort of flying ace, it meant that later on Hitler made him head of the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force.
So he goes from being a First World War fighter pilot hero who's got the Pour le Mérite medal, which is the highest medal that can be won by the German fighting man in the First World War. You know, for the British, it's like winning the Victoria Cross, or for the Americans, it's like winning the kind of Medal of Honor. It's a hugely important award.
The skies over Europe became Goering's battleground, where he proved himself not just as a soldier, but as an exceptional pilot. His fearlessness in combat, coupled with his natural flying ability, quickly earned him a reputation as one of Germany's top aces. But World War I would come to a bitter end for Germany, and for Hermann Goring, the end of the war was a crushing blow. But Goring was not alone in his despair. Across the war-torn landscape, another man shared similar resentment. It was in this shared sense of betrayal and anger that Goring and Adolf Hitler found common ground, setting the stage for the dark chapter that was to come.
When Germany finally capitulates, Hitler is like millions of other servicemen, and indeed civilians, who regards the German army as being what's called stabbed in the back.
This idea that the German army would have been victorious on the battlefield and that this peace treaty was signed in a way that wasn't to Germany's benefit. And of course that peace treaty was very punitive. So many articles in it making restrictions on many things, on the size of the German army, which had to be limited to 100,000, to the standing army.
And this becomes this huge myth that basically it's the people in Berlin who are responsible for the defeat and not really the Allies. And the people in Berlin are members of the left. They are all these sort of kind of quote-unquote evil people that Hitler and his fellow soldiers regard as having betrayed the likes of him.
The inflation ruins the middle classes and the workers. Hitler holds the Republic responsible for the distress and misery.
As Germany grappled with post-war despair, Goering sought refuge in the skies, piloting commercial planes across Scandinavia. It was here that he met Karin von Kantzow, a Swedish noblewoman and soon-to-be wife who offered him stability. Yet the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles would still foster resentment within.
One day Hitler, kind of incognito, goes along to this small party meeting, and it's the German Socialist Workers' Party. And he's meant to be spying on them, but actually he looks at their message and what they're saying about the way the world is and how Germany should be and how the Allies have utterly brought Germany to her knees with the Versailles Treaty, with those huge reparations. And Hitler looks at the message being promulgated by this party and goes, you know what? I want a part of that.
So Hitler joined the DAP, the German Workers' Party, in 1919. And it was a very small and unremarkable party on the radical right of German politics until Hitler joined and really made a difference. And Hitler very quickly established himself as the leader of this party. He changed its name, so it became known as the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party. And he was very keen to try and really promote the party and try and make it have a much more prominent political position. And indeed, he succeeded in many ways.
And also what Hitler is absolutely amazing at is speech making. And to begin to understand Hitler, you've really got to understand that he was the most amazing demagogue. He got on that stage, this little man, and he would sort of grow in stature. And with the power of his oratory, and it was really heartfelt, and he would shout and he would get quiet, and he would almost enter into a kind of trance.
Sein Sowjetzeichen soll er vor sich hertragen und wir werden in unserem Zeichen niederliegen.
And the audiences would be mesmerised by this. And indeed, they'll be mesmerised by it for decades. And this is key to how Hitler gets into power, because when he's on the stage, he becomes another figure.
In the dimly lit back room of a Munich beer hall in 1922, a fateful encounter unfolded. Hermann Goring, a celebrated war hero with a thirst for power, was introduced to a passionate and young Adolf Hitler. Goring was captivated. He was instantly drawn to his vision of a resurgent Germany. In that charged moment, the seeds of an unbreakable alliance were sown, binding Goring to Hitler's radical cause. This meeting marked the beginning of a profound and perilous partnership that would drive them both to the heights of power.
So really what Hitler was doing with the Nazi Party at this time was signalling its arrival and its advent into a serious political contender. And then it started to move away and make a place for itself in German politics.
Preußen wieder zum ersten und stärksten Bollwerk der deutschen Nation zu machen, ist meine Aufgabe. Ich werde sie mit dem Einsatz meiner ganzen Kraft, mit rücksichtsloser Entschlossenheit und mit eisernen Nerven durchführen.
And so he's a venerated pilot, very successful fighter pilot during the First World War, who then kind of loses his way somewhat. And then when he falls in with the Nazis in Munich in the 20s, he's feeling that's giving him a kind of sense of purpose.
The Nazi Party was a small but rapidly growing nationalist movement. They began to assert itself with increasing aggression. They grew in numbers with promises of restoring German pride and overturning the humiliating Treaty of Versailles. Hermann Goring quickly became a prominent figure in the party. With his military prestige and commanding presence, he helped to swell the ranks of the Nazi Party and strengthen its paramilitary wing, the SA. But Hitler was impatient, and they weren't growing fast enough. Together, Hitler and Goring plotted a bold move to seize power in Bavaria to springboard their national dominance, culminating in the ill-fated Munich beer hall putsch of 1923.
Hitler initially is very revolutionary-minded. He's looked at how Mussolini has taken power in fascist Italy by his famous march on Rome. And Hitler's thinking, actually, well, this is what I need to do. I need to do a sort of a march, I'm not going to wait to get to power, in a kind of democratic process. I mean, that's just going to take me forever. And so what you end up having in 1923 is this infamous failed putsch in which Hitler and some of his acolytes like Hermann Goring, they march through the streets of Munich and they try to seize power by rounding up all the local politicians in a beer hall. And it's called the beer hall putsch for that reason.
During the putsch, Goring emerged as a commanding figure, dressed in full military regalia and symbolizing the militant aspirations of the Nazi movement. Leading the charge through the streets of Munich, he inspired confidence among the putschists with his visible commitment. However, his prominence made him a target, and he was seriously wounded in a fierce exchange of gunfire with the police.
But it's a dreadful failure. They're marching down the street, they're fired upon by police. Hermann Goring is wounded really quite badly. This is an absolute farce.
His injury and dramatic escape into hiding only heightened his legend, casting him as a valiant fighter for the Nazi cause, undeterred even in the face of failure.
Any account of the Beer Hall Putsch that says it was a heroic and noble effort by the Nazis to seize power, I'm afraid, is reading Nazi propaganda.
I think that maybe the most important thing that came out of this subsequently was that Hitler realised that he would have to find a way to take his power in Germany in a legal way rather than by force. So I think that the circumstances hadn't been exactly right for what he'd expected. I think he thought he had more support than he did. I mean, he did have some important support already at this stage, but not enough to do what he was intending to do in Munich in 1923.
Den Folgen dieses Verbrechens nur dann wird begegnen können, wenn man...
As a result of the Beer Hall Putsch, this horrific failure that Hitler kind of tried to lead, he is arrested, and he is tried and he is found guilty of trying to mount a revolution. Actually, that could result in a death sentence, but it doesn't. He gets sentenced to a spell in Landsberg prison.
The former paper hanger was jailed in 1923 in this cell for attempting to overthrow the government.
While Hitler languished in prison, Hermann Goring's fate hung in the balance. Wounded and on the run, Goring escaped Germany, his body battered, but his spirit unbroken.
When he's recuperating from his wounds, he's given morphine, heroin, effectively. And it's that he becomes addicted to.
As Hitler plotted from his cell, writing Mein Kampf and refining his vision for Germany's future, Goring bided his time, nursing his wounds and preparing for the moment when the Nazi cause would rise again.
After Hitler was released from Landsberg prison in 1925, he set about refounding the Nazi Party, which had fallen into disarray, and really not just refounding it, but really trying to bring it back to strength, and indeed from strength to strength. So between 1925 and 1928, he was very much concerned to try to organise the party as best as possible, put a lot of effort and energy into canvassing, trying to get new membership, and indeed trying to get new voters.
Many people, I mean, there's news reports, looking at a little news cutting from the New York Times saying that Hitler is finished because he's gone to prison. We'll never see the likes of him again. How wrong that is. Because Hitler comes out of prison, and by the mid to late 20s, he is starting to build up the Nazi Party as this absolutely kind of awesome apparatus it's going to become.
Upon his return to Germany, Goring quickly reinserted himself into the heart of the movement. He became one of Hitler's closest confidants, a man whose loyalty was matched only by his ambition. Goring's charisma and military credentials made him indispensable to Hitler, who recognized in Goring a ruthless efficiency and an unyielding commitment to the Nazi vision.
And Hitler starts to build up his power by, trying to employ and find the right people who are going to listen to the beat of his drum and follow it. And so there's a lot of very patient politicking and a lot of persuasion, a lot of speech making. It's a very, very difficult rise to power. But Hitler knows that it can't take place through force. It has to take place from the ballot box and not the bullet.
Over the next 9 years, Hitler, with the relentless support of Hermann Goring and his loyal cadre of political followers, steadily and methodically maneuvered his way to the pinnacle of power in the German government, inching ever closer to their ultimate goal of absolute control.
While most of you were graduating from high school, we read that a funny little man called Hitler had come into power in Germany.
When the Nazi Party seized power in 1933, it was Goring who was entrusted with one of the most critical roles. Appointed as Minister of the Interior of Prussia, the largest and most influential state in Germany, Goring set to work with chilling precision.
So when the Nazis do come to power, and that's partly thanks to the fact that Goring is such a capable politician, and because he comes from a pretty well-off background and married to an aristocrat, he to some of the kind of old-school German bigwigs looks like the decent face of Nazism because he's kind of a war hero and quite an old-school figure. So he's absolutely instrumental in helping the Nazis get into power.
He established the Gestapo, the secret police force that would become synonymous with terror, ruthlessly crushing any opposition to the Nazi regime.
This is a new police force There's already the Kripo, the criminal police. But this is a new type of policeman. It's a policeman who is in plain clothes. It's a policeman who recruits informers on every block, on every street, and every block of flats in order for the people to effectively police themselves. And of course, this becomes an incredibly important part of the Nazi apparatus.
It was Goring who orchestrated the Reichstag fire decree, a pivotal moment that allowed the Nazis to dismantle civil liberties and eliminate political rivals, clearing the path for Hitler's absolute dictatorship.
It's highly likely, but never proven, whether the Nazis actually burnt it down themselves. But certainly, in a sense, it doesn't matter. What happens is that Hitler and the Nazis took advantage of the Reichstag burning down to show that there was a communist plot against what the Nazis described as still being a democratic government. And it enabled them to seize more power, by emergency decree. So you have a lot of laws being passed, unsurprisingly, to give the Nazis more power.
As the Nazi grip on Germany tightened, Goring's power continued to grow.
And he consolidates a lot of power into his own pockets and hands, if you like. So he's in charge of the Prussian police. He's initially in charge of the Gestapo, the secret state police. He's in charge of the 4-year plan, which is an important economic imperative.
In 1935, he was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Luftwaffe, the newly reconstituted German Air Force. Under his command, the Luftwaffe became a formidable instrument of war, a symbol of the Third Reich's military might. Goring oversaw its expansion, transforming it into a fearsome force that would spearhead Germany's early conquests in World War II.
I mean, this is a man with a lot of power, and he uses it to personally enrich himself.
On September 1st, 1939, the world was thrust into darkness as German forces stormed across the Polish border, igniting the flames of World War II. At the helm of this brutal onslaught was Hermann Goring, commanding the fearsome Luftwaffe. The skies were his domain, and Goring's bombers unleashed devastation upon Poland, paving the way for the Wehrmacht's rapid advance. His role was pivotal in these early days of the war, where the Luftwaffe's supremacy seemed unassailable, driving home the sheer power of Hitler's war machine. Goring, once a decorated war hero, now reveled in his role as the architect of airborne destruction, believing that the world was within their grasp. But as the war raged on, the tides would begin to turn, and the man who once soared high would soon find himself plummeting into disgrace.
Now, when you look at pictures of Goring throughout the war, you just see this body getting bigger, bigger and bigger, and his uniforms getting more and more ostentatious. The German people would laugh at his uniforms because they were like something out of a comic opera. And he had like millions of medals everywhere, and the uniforms would be like bright white with gold all over them. And he would have properties, amazing hunting lodges, and whenever the Nazis conquered countries, he'd be right at the front of it, looting all the works of art, statues, paintings, jewelry, you name it, that would all go into Goring's pockets. He made himself almost impossibly rich. And he also had vast appetites, not only for morphine, but also for alcohol, for food, for all the finest things in life. Goring collected.
The turning point came in the summer of 1940, during the Battle of Britain. Tasked with crushing the British resistance from the air, Goring's Luftwaffe faltered. His bombers, once feared, were met with fierce resistance by the Royal Air Force, and Goring's overconfidence led to catastrophic miscalculations.
And in fact, he became a victim of his own self-indulgence. And when the Battle of Britain failed, and when the German Air Force was shown to be, inferior to a smaller British Air Force, he started, to be laughed at behind his back. He became this kind of drug-addled, alcoholic whale of a man who other Nazis would laugh at and not take seriously and saw him as an impediment.
Nazis in full retreat. From northern France, more headline news of Germans in headlong flight.
So once the Red Army came into German territory in 1945, then Hitler's position as this infallible ruler and leader really not only became to be called into question, but really came to its end.
The first half of 1945 is probably the darkest 6 months in Germany's history, because it's being invaded by the Russians, the Red Army from the east, and you've got the other allies coming through from the west. And it's the Russians who reach Berlin first. And when they reach Berlin, it's a city in rubble, it's a city in flames, it's a city in chaos, it's a city in which squads of marauding loyal Nazis are going around hanging people who are not taking part in the resistance to the city.
The end of life.
This is a war brought about by Hitler, and this is a war that Hitler has fought for too long, and he's fighting it to the death. And he's fighting it to the death of the people who he supposedly loves, and he no longer loves them by the